Hey guys, in this video the lovely team is going to be talking to you about elections in the UK, how they work, when they take place and who does what. This is all part of your GCSE Citizenship. Now, to help you remember everything that you need to from this video, over on my website there are a load of multiple choice questions just waiting for you.
Countries such as the US. General elections in the UK do not happen at a fixed date. In the US, elections happen for the presidency every 4 years. General elections in the UK can happen more or less frequently. However, theoretically, there is an upper limit on how long can go between elections due to the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which sets an upper limit of more or less 5 years between elections. However, they can happen sooner on the wishes of the Prime Minister. For a Prime Minister to call a general election early, however, that has to go through Parliament, needing a 2/3 vote for that to occur. A general election can be forced on a government. If the government loses a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons and cannot win one within a very small period of time, then the general election is forced to happen to elect a new government. When an election is called, Parliament is dissolved. The MPs formally cease to be MPs. They just become private citizens. They lose the initials MP after their name and return back to their constituencies. They become the candidate for that constituency and they carry out routine Member of Parliament business on a caretaker basis. However, at the election, they may be re-elected, at which point they just carry on, or they may lose their seat and cease completely being an MP. A set amount of campaigning time begins, usually between 3 and 6 weeks. It can be longer, and the exact date of the election is up to the Prime Minister. If they think that their party will benefit from a long campaign, they may use a long campaigning period. However, if they think a short campaign would be beneficial to them, they will make the general election as soon after the announcement as is possible. By tradition in the UK, elections are always held on a Thursday, with the results happening through Thursday night and into Friday, and then a new or the same government being returned and seeking the approval of the Queen at some point on the Friday afternoon. Historically, most elections have been in either May or June. This is mostly for reasons of weather, to make it as easy and as pleasant for people as possible to go and vote. However, there have been cases of elections happening later in the year. In 2019, the election was in December. In 1974, there was an election in October. So although it is tradition for elections to be in May or June, it does not always occur. The UK is divided up into 650 constituencies. There are roughly the same number of people in each constituency. However, in some outlying constituencies, such as islands off the coast, there may be less. In some inner city, heavily populated constituencies, there may be more. Every now and again, usually roughly every 10 years after a census, the Boundary Commission, a neutral organisation, may redraw boundaries to equalise the number of people in constituents. Each one of these constituencies returns a single Member of Parliament, and each constituency has a number of polling stations where people vote. These polling stations are usually taken over primary schools, village halls. They've been held in shops, in pubs, in caravans. Almost anywhere can be a polling station. Everyone registered to vote, who's filled in a very short form, is provided with a card before the election, which lets them know where their local polling station is and which one to go to. Polling stations can be visited to vote at any point between the polls opening at 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. when they close on the day of the election. For people who are unable to reach a polling station, postal votes are available. They're dispatched a few weeks prior to polling day, but they're not open and counted until polling day itself. Something worth mentioning here is that the ballot in the UK is private. Nobody should ever see you vote. There are obviously exceptions to that in cases of disability, but as a general rule, we have a secret ballot in the UK. As we have discussed, each of the 650 constituencies in the United Kingdom returns a single Member of Parliament. However, the Speaker of the House of Commons is neutral, and usually their seat is not contested, at least by mainstream parties. There are other conditions under which seats are not contested. If an MP dies, especially in violent circumstances, while sitting as MP for that seat, the other major parties will usually not contest the following by-election. An example of this was after Joe Cox, the MP for Batley, and the other major parties did not contest the by-election. However, any party having 326 or more MPs has a majority. They must numerically have more members of Parliament in the House of Commons than the other parties put together. They are therefore the majority party, and their leader will be invited by the Queen to form a government. If this figure is not reached by any of the parties, as has happened several times recently, parties can form a coalition where 2 or more parties work together to form a government. For example, between 2010 and 2015, there was a coalition between the Liberal Democrats and Conservative parties. If no formal coalition is entered into, a more common form of reaching agreement is a confidence and supply vote. A confidence and supply vote, or a confidence and supply arrangement, is where one of the smaller parties agrees to generally support the government. However, this may vary by issue. For many parties, especially the smaller ones who agree to support a larger party, they will have certain issues they wish to be put to a vote. This can also happen in coalitions. A good example of this would be during the 2010 to 2015 coalition government. The Liberal Democrats agreed to enter coalition with the Conservative Party on the condition that several of their priorities would be addressed. Things like same-sex marriage, action on the environment. The charge on carrier bags is one result of that, and a referendum on changing our voting system. If no party has an overall majority, this is known as a hung parliament. While they are relatively rare, they have become more common in recent times. To put this in context, we have 2 recent general elections which contrast quite heavily. In 1997, Labour achieved 418 seats under Tony Blair. The Conservatives under John Major achieved 165. The Liberal Democrats under Paddy Ashdown achieved 46, and the others, a mixture of independents, Greens, nationalist parties, achieved 30. This gave Labour a majority of 179 over the Conservatives, slightly less over the other parties, but their majority was 179 over the opposition. This was a huge majority and more than enough to form a government. As a result, in 1997, Mr Blair was able to form a Labour government without the need for arrangements with other smaller parties. By contrast, in 2010, the results were less clear. The Conservatives under David Cameron got a result of 306 seats, Gordon Brown 258. The Lib Dems under Nick Clegg 57, and again others, mostly nationalist parties such as the SNP and Plaid Cymru, got 29. The result from this election, therefore, was that there was no overall majority for one party. It was not possible for one party to govern alone, as the other parties put together would be more than enough to have more MPs than them. Therefore, negotiations were entered into between the Conservatives and Lib Dems to see if they could work together, as their combined number of MPs would be enough to give a small but sizable government majority, certainly enough to work with through a parliament. Those coalition agreements were successful, and a coalition government was formed shortly after the election day. The UK therefore got its first coalition government since the war in 2010. While every election is very different and plays out in a very different way, there is a general pattern of events which can be followed. On the Thursday at 7 a.m, polls open, and the general public is able to go and vote at polling stations. This continues through till 10 p.m, at which point polls close. Anybody still waiting in the polling station at 10 p.m. is allowed to continue queuing and vote, but the main doors are closed at that point. Shortly after 10 o'clock, usually 1 or 2 minutes past, the BBC exit poll, the first really real concrete signifier of how the election has gone for the parties, is announced. At about 11:30, the first result from the first constituency comes in. There is always a light-hearted race between different constituencies to see which one can get their result in first. It tends to be constituencies in the far northeast, in Newcastle and Sunderland, who are usually able to do it in about an hour and a half. Results then come in rather thick and fast after that first one, and by Friday at approx 3 a.m, the majority of results from all constituencies are in. It's possible at this point that it is clear what the new government will be. Generally, if it is not numerically possible for one party to win, they will concede. By the time you reach 9 a.m. on Friday, almost all the results are in and the overall result is clear. It's possible that constituencies which are extremely rural, like Skipton and Ripon, or which are based on islands off the coast, such as Orkney and Shetland, may not yet have been able to declare their result. But of the 650 seats, by this point, maybe 630 would be expected. On Friday afternoon, if applicable, the current Prime Minister, assuming they have lost, tenders their resignation to the Queen. If they haven't lost, they continue on as normal. Roughly 15 minutes after this process, if there is a new Prime Minister, they are asked by the Queen to form a government. By 6 p.m. on Friday, usually, give or take a few hours, the transfer of power and office between the two governments is complete, and the democratic process has completed. It's possible to watch full general election results. Many of them are repeated on BBC Parliament. It's useful revision to watch a full general election result unfold, to get a better idea of how elections happen and how they're commentated on. My recommendation would be to look for the 1979, 1997 or 2010 elections. The first sample constituency we will look at is the very rural island constituency of Orkney and Shetland, which comprises the outlying Scottish islands. This is a geographically huge constituency, covering an enormous area and some of the most outlying bits of the United Kingdom. It does, however, have a very small electorate. These islands are sparsely populated, and therefore it has one of the smallest electorates in the UK, of about 33,000. Because of this and the difficulty in getting the votes to a central location to count, it is usually one of the last constituencies to declare, usually very late on Friday or potentially even later going into the weekend. It's a rural constituency, identifies very much as being Scottish, and has an economy based on tourism, people visiting those islands, and agriculture, the farming that happens there. One of the key industries on these islands is whisky manufacture. Its current MP is a Liberal Democrat, and this has not changed for many years. In stark contrast to that constituency, another good one to look at is Newcastle-upon-Tyne Central. This is a very small constituency in geographical terms, comprising really only the very central part of the large city of Newcastle-upon-Tyne. Because it has a huge population density, being an inner city seat, it has a medium-sized electorate of about 66,000. Because it is so small, it's possible to collect and count the votes very quickly, and Newcastle-upon-Tyne is usually one of the first constituencies to declare. It generally has a friendly race with Sunderland across the river. Quite often, the result from Newcastle-upon-Tyne is the first concrete result for the parties of how they have done, and while it has been a safe Labour seat for many years, the swing to and away from different parties can give their leaders an idea of how they've done. The inner city of Newcastle-upon-Tyne has large amounts of poverty and a mix of different ethnicities. It's a safe Labour seat, although it did swing very much towards the Conservatives at the last election.